Recording in progress.
Okay. Here we go. All right, so we're on. Oh, what I didn't do, I humbly apologize. It shouldn't take me but a minute. Just to get the Mishnah up on the side. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'll put the Hebrew up first. Okay, the Hebrew's up in the chat. And I'll put up the English. Okay, that's the first part of the English. Second part of the English. Okay, there we go. So we have both the Hebrew and the English up on the chat. Okay. Okay, so it's recording. Great. Okay, so this week's Mishnah, very, very fascinating Mishnah, and very important Mishnah. The Mishnah continues on in the theme of what this chapter is, and this chapter is the chapter called Kinyan HaTorah, and Kinyan HaTorah means the acquisition of Torah, and that's exactly what's going on here in this parak, that it's talking about not only how to acquire Torah, but the amazingness of Torah, that it needs to be acquired, and that it's something that needs to stay as the center of our lives. Last week we had a very beautiful Mishnah that spoke about the sound that compels us and calls to us every single day from Sinai. And this week the Mishnah says as follows: Halomed mechavero perek echad, a person who learns from his friend one perek, one chapter, o halacha achas, or one halacha, and each one of these delineations is a delineation of another section of the Torah. So if you're dealing with the Torah itself, with the 5 books of Moses, or anything else that's called the written Torah, so then that's perek echad, or in scripture, o halacha achas, or one halacha, or pasuk echad, or a dibur echad, o afilu os achas, even one letter. So if you learn one thing from another person, tzarech linag bo kavod, then you have to give kavod to that person. Tzarech linag bo kavod, you have to act in an honorable way towards that person, as they have become your Torah teacher. Shekein matzinu b'David, because we find by David HaMelech that Melech Yisrael shelo lomed me'achitofel el shnei devarim bilvad, that he learned only 2 things from Achitofel, and nevertheless Kura'o, he called him Rabbo Alufo Umiudo, his teacher, his master, and the one who guided him. Shenemar. Where do we see that? We see that in the pasuk of Tehillim, where David HaMelech says, referring to Achitofel, Ave'ata enosh ke'erchi alufi umiyudai. That's what we say, that when a person teaches somebody else Torah, so then they become their Rebbe, as David HaMelech said about Achitofel in Tehillim. Now, the Mishnah then says, "V'halo dvarim kal v'chomer." Isn't this a kal v'chomer? Kal v'chomer means a fortiori argument. It's a type of reasoning that we find in the Talmud, and the type of reasoning is that if it's true in this case, then it's going to be true in this case also. And what do we mean here? Umad David Melech Yisrael, David the king of Israel, Shelo lamad me Achitofel ela shnei dvarim bilvad, who only learned two things from David HaMelech. That David HaMelech only learned from Achitofel, two things. Kura'o Rabo Alufo Umiyudo. David HaMelech called him Rabo Alufo Umiyudo. Halomed Mechavero, somebody who learns from his friend. Perek Echad, one chapter. O halacha achas, or one halacha. O pasuk echad, or one pasuk. O dibur echad, or one word. Or afilu osachas, even one letter. Alachas kama v'kama, how much more so. Shetzarich linog bo kavod, that you have to treat them with kavod. Ve'ein kavod ela Torah. And what is kavod? Kavod is Torah. Shenamar kavod chachamim yinchalu, that the honor of the sages you will inherit. To tmimim yinchalu tov. Okay, so the very, very, very major. So let's actually look at the Mishnah. What's the Mishnah saying to us? Mishnah is saying when you receive Torah from another person, when you learn Torah from another person, so then you have an obligation to give that person recognition, to give that person kavod, because that person has become your Rebbe. That's what the Mishnah says, and then it brings an example from David HaMelech. There's a very, very major problems here. Let's start from the very beginning of the Mishnah. My first question tonight is that, and I think that it's a question that every single person here can ask without me. You learn one halacha from a person, they become your Rebbe? Person comes over to you, you're putting on your tefillin, and they say to you, you're putting it on wrong, do it this way, and that now becomes Rebbe? That person's a noch schlepper like you. It happens to be that they know that particular thing about tefillin that you didn't know. Shkoyach. But they're going to teach that because they taught that to you, they automatically become your Rebbe. You go to somebody's house for Shabbos, and you see candle lighting, and you see that, maybe I've been doing it wrong all these years, and you ask them, and they say, this is the way I learned it from my rabbi. I learned that you're supposed to light candles this way. Wow, and that person now is your Rebbe? When that person walks into a room, so then you have to stand up for that person? Doesn't make any sense. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. So it doesn't make sense that person automatically becomes your Rebbe. So it's very hard to understand what the Mishnah is saying. We know that who is a person's Rebbe? Who is a person's Rebbe Muvhak? Like their main Torah teacher. So the answer that the Talmud gives, and the answer that any person who was thinking would give, would be that the person's main Rebbe is a person that taught them Rov Torah, so the majority of their Torah. A person who's responsible for that person learning Torah, growing in Torah, that becomes a person's Rebbe. The truth is, I've heard it said that a person's real Rebbe is the man or woman that taught them Aleph Beis. That's a person's real Rebbe. So if you learned Aleph Beis when you were 5 or 7, then that person that taught you the Aleph Beis is your Rebbe. Why? Because that's the last person that taught you absolute truth. And what I mean by absolute truth is that there is none of your personality in Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet. Aleph is an Aleph, Beis is a Beis, Gimel is a Gimel. You can't make it more attractive, less attractive. You can make the learning of it more or less attractive, but the Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet is the Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. Other parts of the Torah, the way we interpret it, understand it, the bent that we give it comes very much from the teacher itself, which is exactly the way the Torah is supposed to be. That's not a negative thing. It's a fabulous thing. But nevertheless, you can't call it emes la'amita. You can't call it absolute truth because it's got a little bit of the person and the personality mixed into it. But Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet is Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. And Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet in Chicago is the same Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet in La Jolla, and it's the same Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet in India, and it's the same Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet in Israel. It's the same letters. It's that truth of the Torah is universal. But that's a person's Rebbe. Just because a person taught you a certain halacha, so then that person becomes your Rebbe. And if you look at the wording very carefully, it doesn't say a person who taught you Torah. It says halomed mechavero perek echad. That's going to be critical later. If you learn from a person. So we're not even talking about an active teaching. We're talking about a passive teaching. I'm watching you and I learn something from you. You become a Rebbe. Come over to you and say, Rabbi. And you look at me and you go, what are you drinking? What are you talking about? Rebbe. But if you learned something from me, that's what the Mishnah is saying. So what exactly does that mean? Okay, that's only number one. Number two, look carefully at the words. It says that when you learn one thing from another person, so then they become your Rebbe, tzarich linhag bo kavod. Look at that carefully. Tzarich linhag bo. You know, the word noheg means to practice or to act towards them in a certain way. But it doesn't necessarily mean to give them kavod. You don't have to stand up when they walk into a room. You don't have to talk to them in third person like in the yeshiva world and in many worlds we talk to people of importance and, to Torah scholars and Rebbeim. We talk to them in third person with the Rebbe like. So whenever for me, I'm not so comfortable with it. Whenever people talk to me, and I got guys in my new shul that talk to me that way, and they say with the rabbi like a coffee. I said he'd probably like coffee. I would like one also. It's just not whatever. It's not something I'm so comfortable with. But nevertheless, that's the way we talk. We talk. That's when we're Chabad Torah. We talk to Torah in third person. We don't talk directly to Torah. So if that's the case, though, then why is it saying here tzarich linhag bo kavod? Why doesn't it say tzarich lechabed, that you have to honor them? Why just linhag bo? It's sort of like act, pretend of kavod. Like what's going on here? That's my second problem. Third problem. So we tried to use a piece of Talmudic reasoning, a piece of logic called kal v'chomer, that if David HaMelech learns from Achitofel two things, so then how much more so when we learn it from a friend of ours, if we learn one thing, we're obligated to show them kavod. Now, I realize it's 7:30 at night, 7:48. I realize that, it's getting tired already. Mind is slowing down. But I think that everybody can chap, right? Everybody can understand. What? What kind of argument is this? That if by David HaMelech, the Achitofel taught him two things, and he became David's Rebbe, then when a regular person teaches a person one thing, they become their Rebbe. There's something wrong with the logic here. It's supposed to work the other way. If you learn from somebody one thing, how much more so from somebody else who learned two things? But what's the logic? What's going on here? Mm-hmm. Okay. My fourth problem. What's the point of this Mishnah? The point of the Mishnah is, again, that you become a Rebbe. You don't become a Rebbe. You got to work a little bit harder, and not get paid more money to be somebody's Rebbe. It doesn't just work this way. That you teach them one halacha, and all of a sudden you become a Rebbe, right? You get to sit in the front of the place, right? You get to have all the great cover that comes along with being a Rebbe. Like, it doesn't happen this way. So what's the point of the Mishnah? Point of the Mishnah is that I have to be grateful, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Yeah, okay. I don't even think that's the point of the Mishnah. So what's the point of the Mishnah? It'll take me a little while to get there, but what's the point of the Mishnah? Okay. So let's go back to the very beginning of the Mishnah. The Mishnah, I pointed out, does not say hamelamed, right? Somebody who teaches or somebody who learns, somebody who teaches one perek or one word or one halacha to another person. It doesn't say hamelamed. It says halomed. So it's not talking to the teacher. It's not about the teacher teaching. It's about the learner learning. And I think what the Mishnah is saying is that when a person learns, they have to be grateful for the knowledge that they've received, and it doesn't really matter about the teacher, because they could be receiving it from the teacher, what's called kila'acher yad, like from the back of the hand, meaning that the teacher is not really setting out to teach anything. The teacher is just being, the teacher is just speaking, the teacher is just saying, and not necessarily instructing or teaching. But I still have an obligation to be makir tov, to recognize the goodness and to be appreciative of what I've received. Because in general, when it comes to hakaras hatov, it's not about what you've done, it's about what I've received. So my gratitude is I'm not grateful because you did that for me, which, I mean, there's a component of it, but that's not the main thing. The main thing, because if you did nothing for me, if it was all about the energy you expended on my behalf, so then if you expended no energy to give me something, I would have less or no hakaras hatov for you. In other words, if I knew that you re-gifted something to me, so then, somebody gave you a gift, you looked at it and you said, ooh, I'm not keeping that thing, right? And you give it on to somebody else. So let's say I knew about that. I knew that you re-gifted something, but you gave me something. So if it's all dependent upon the amount of energy that you exerted zero energy, you spent zero money on this, right? You did nothing. You merely just took it from that person, took it for yourself, and then passed it on to me. So if we're going to say that hakaras hatov is dependent on your energy, then I don't really have much of an obligation of being makir tov. Don't really have much of an obligation to be grateful. But it's got nothing to do with the energy that you've expended. It has to do with the fact that I didn't have something before and I have something now. This is something that we learned from the Torah. We know that by Reuven did something messy with his father's tent, that he went and he messed around with where his father was supposed to sleep and who his father was supposed to sleep with. He switched beds. It wasn't a nice thing to do, and it wasn't so appropriate, and he got punished for it. And he got really chastised and really kicked out from the rest of the brothers. Yosef has a dream. And in his dream, he dreams about all of his brothers bowing down to him. And in that dream, if you count the numbers, Reuven sees that, Yosef has included me amongst the tribes, which means at some point I'm being brought back in. At some point, my tshuva is going to be accepted, my repentance is going to be accepted, and I'm going to be brought back into my brothers. And because of that, Reuven wanted to save Yosef when he got thrown in the pit, because he had tremendous hakaras hatov for Yosef. If he would have walked over to Yosef and he would have said to Yosef, "Thank you very much. You've made me feel much better," Yosef would have looked at him and said, "What are you talking about?" Would have had no idea what he was saying. Because Yosef didn't include him in because he was trying to make him feel better. Yosef wasn't trying to send him a message. Yosef didn't even know that he was reading it. Yosef didn't even know what he was reading. But that God put that idea into Yosef's head. That dream was a dream that came from God, and in it was embedded that message. All Yosef was a conduit for that message. And as a conduit for that message, Reuven had incredible hakaras hatov. He had incredible gratitude. A Kohen, we have a custom that after Birchas Kohanim, after the priestly blessing, when the Kohanim walk down, so when they walk past us, we say Yasher Koach Kohen. Yasher Koach Kohen. Now, what kind of Yasher Koach are we giving to the Kohen? He didn't do anything. A Kohen is obligated to give Birchas Kohanim. He can't sit back in shul and say, I don't like with taking off the shoes and the whole business. That's not my bag. I'm not going to give the Birchas Kohanim. He doesn't have the rights to do that. He has an obligation to do it. I mean, he can walk outside. He can do whatever he wants. But I'm saying he's giving up his obligation. He has an obligation from the Torah to bless the congregation. Why am I saying Yasher Koach to him? He's doing what he has to do. Because what I'm saying to him is that thank you for giving me that blessing. The blessing, Birchas Kohanim, is we underestimate what Birchas Kohanim is. There's, we do it. We only do it a few times a year in America for Ashkenazim, and it's very special. But we don't even realize necessarily how special it is. Here in Israel, we have another problem that we do it every single day. We do it every single Shachris. Days where there's Musaf, we do it every single Musaf. So Birchas Kohanim is very, very common if you have a Kohen in your shul. We don't have a Kohen in our shul. So we very often don't have Birchas Kohanim. However, there is some holy Jew who davens across the street in a Sephardi minyan, who after davening, every Shabbos, almost every Shabbos, will come. He's finished. He's on his way home. But he knows that we don't have a Kohen, and he doesn't want us to miss out on that level of blessing from God, because it's really the Kohen is delivering a direct blessing from God. When the Chazan says Yivarechecha, and the Chazan and the Kohen repeats Yivarecha, it's not really the Kohen talking. It's really God himself. And then in the words of the Kohen is embedded God's bracha. It is an incredibly powerful and incredibly important moment. And this tzaddik of a Yid comes every single Shabbos so that we should have Birchas Kohanim. He's not going to daven by us. He has a place where he davens. He's a Sephardi, but he comes in and he does the duchni. And he sort of gets annoyed with me every Shabbos when I go over to him as he's leaving. I go over to him and I say, Yasher Koach. He doesn't even realize the degree to which I appreciate, and not only appreciate, but I marvel at him, that this guy thinks about this. It's not something that he just now, okay, they called him in to do Birchas Kohanim. He thinks about this. He thinks about making it on time to be able to go and to do Birchas Kohanim. That's an incredible thing. But when I say thank you to him, I'm not saying thank you to him for giving me Birchas Kohanim. What I'm saying thank you is that on some level, I'm appreciative of what he's done because this guy's really gone out of his way. But for a regular Kohen who's in the shul, he hasn't really gone out of his way. He's done what he has to do. When I say Yasher Koach to that Kohen, what I'm saying to that Kohen is thank you. I have received something amazing. I think that's an important thing when it comes to gratitude, because a lot of times when a person gives you something, you really aren't grateful because the way they gave it to you is demoted, right? The way they give it to you is denuded of any of its greatness. Right? They toss something at you, or they give it to you with attitude, right? At the end of the day, you go to somebody, you ask them for help, and they give you 50,000 excuses why they can't help you. And then as they're helping you, they're huffing and puffing and so I hope we finish this fast because I don't really have any time. And the person's like fetching the whole time. And in the end, they gave you something. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I gotta run. Shkayach. But that doesn't affect, it can't affect the way I feel and the gratitude I need to have, because the gratitude is to the fact that I have something that I didn't have before. And in that lies the essence of Akar Satov, that it doesn't matter the intention of the giver, that we are obligated to recognize that we received something. And that's the opening of the Mishnah. The opening of the Mishnah is it's not about the teacher. It's about halomed mechavero. So even if you say my friend is not really a worthy friend, it's not really, friend is the other person I know, is just, stam, a noch schlepper like me. Right, he's holding on the same level I'm holding on. He keeps as many mitzvahs as I keep or don't keep, and he's like a peer. Doesn't make a difference. You learn from him, you have to be appreciative. Okay, but let's push it a little bit further. This would mean, by the way, that even when you watch another person and you learn something from another person, whatever it is, in a minute we're going to learn whatever linag bo kavod means. So then that's what you have to have, even if you passively learn from somebody that just happens to be standing next to you. By the way, that's the reason why it's so difficult to achieve this. It's difficult to really be grateful. Saying thank you is easy. Saying thank you, and a monkey could say thank you. Right? Saying thank you is not what we're talking about. It's feeling grateful. There was once a great rabbi that said to his son, there was a certain person, and when I say great rabbi, this was like, one of the top 10. There was a certain person in the town who hated this person, hated the rabbi, and made his life miserable. This rabbi once turned to his son, he said to his son, I can't understand why this person hates me so much. I never did them a favor. You have to think about that. In other words, I never gave them anything. And if I never gave them anything or did anything for them, and thereby created an obligation to be grateful, so then there's no reason for them to hate me. What does that mean? Because very often the person that gives us something, the more they give to us, the more we end up hating them. Now, when I say we, I'm not talking about anybody that's here. But there is a disease out there. There is a thing out there with people, and I'm not saying that none of us have ever experienced it. A lot of times when you feel grateful, along with that comes the realization that I couldn't have done this myself. That whatever it is that I've received from you, I received from you, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't accomplish it myself. And therefore, I'm a little embarrassed that I couldn't have accomplished this myself. I'm a little embarrassed that I couldn't have done this without you. Now, there are two ways to deal with that embarrassment. Is to realize, you know what, I got a little hole, I got to fill the hole, I got to fix this. But to you, I feel absolute gratitude because you gave me that opportunity to realize that I'm missing something, and you gave me the opportunity to be able to accomplish something that I couldn't have accomplished without you. But for some, that realization is too difficult. And because it's too difficult, it turns into hatred. When I realize that I couldn't have done this without you, so then what I'm saying is that I'm not as powerful as I like to think that I am. And that's difficult for me to admit. And therefore, the only way that I can live with myself, the only way that I'm going to be comfortable, is if I can shoot you down. Because then, if I can somehow impair you and somehow knock you out of the picture, then I don't have to admit that I couldn't have done it without you. And therefore, very often, what happens is that when we receive something from someone and that we are on some level embarrassed about it, it turns itself into hatred. And that's why Hakaras HaTov is so difficult. Because the word that we use in our davening for Hakaras HaTov, for gratitude to God, is modim. Mode ani lefanecha, or modim anachnu lach. The word moda really means to admit. When you're in a court case and you have to admit that, let's say somebody claiming that you owe them $1,000 and you say you only owe them $500, that's called a moda b'miktsas. You've admitted to a half of it. When you're moda, you're admitting, you're agreeing to a claim. What does moda have to do with Thanksgiving? Because that's exactly what you're doing when you're saying thank you. You're being moda to the fact that somebody filled up a hole that you had in your life. Somebody was able to do something for you that you couldn't do yourself. And that's why when we talk to God and we say thank you to God, it's not just, we don't just say toda rabbah. It's modim anachnu lach. We are admitting that we are powerless. We are admitting that we are not all powerful. We are admitting that we can't do all of this ourselves and that we need you. And that's what the basis of Hakaras HaTov is, and that's why Hakaras HaTov, this concept, is so difficult. So the Mishnah says that when you recognize that you've received something from somebody else, so then you have to linog bo kavod. The Mishnah doesn't say thank you. We know that from 1,000 other places. Here it's different. When you're dealing with Torah knowledge that you've received from somebody else, so then that Torah knowledge that you've received from somebody else, that has to be packaged in a different way. That gratitude has to be packaged in a different way. That gratitude has to be packaged in the kavod haTorah, in honor to the Torah. Look, they're not your teacher. The Mishnah didn't say that. They're not considered your Torah teacher. You don't have to stand up for them. The Mishnah didn't say tzarich lechabdom, that you have to honor them. The Mishnah said you have to be noeg kavod. You have to give them a special kind of kavod that is similar to the kind of kavod that we have to give to a Rebbe, that we have to give to our teacher. You know, there's an incredible halacha. If a father and a Rebbe are drowning, and you can only save one of them, if the father didn't teach any Torah, and the Rebbe taught Torah to the child, to the person, it's a technical halacha, not a practical halacha. So then you'd be obligated to save the teacher, your teacher, over saving your father. And the reason is because your father gave you Chai Olam Hazeh, whereas your Torah teacher gave you Chai Olam Haba, gave you life in the world to come. That's such a difficult halacha. But the reason why it's so difficult is because we don't quite recognize the power and the value of Torah. To recognize that somebody that's given me Chaye Olam Haba, life in the world to come, has given me everything. Now, if your father also is your Torah teacher, so then it changes the whole game. If your father also taught you things, which are life lessons that are Torah lessons, without necessarily even couching them in Torah, it also becomes complicated. But the point I'm making the point dramatically, where a father is just a father, not a teacher, and then a teacher, because we have to understand the value of Torah. And when you've given me Torah, when I've received something of Torah of you, I've received life. In the same way that we appreciate our parents, the whole mitzvah of honoring our parents is only because they gave us life. It has nothing to do with what they've given us. Has nothing to do with the amount of stuff they've given us, and has nothing to do with the value of stuff they've given us. Even if they've given us nothing, our obligation to be grateful to them is because they have given us life itself. And we have to recognize that with Torah. You know, I'm afraid to ask this question, so I don't want to. I'm actually looking at myself on the screen. I'm not looking at anybody's faces. I don't want to see your reactions. But imagine that a person who you respect as a Torah teacher, but respect as a giant in Torah, offered you every single day to study with you for a half hour one-on-one, and to give you all the basics of Torah. This is forever. They will learn with you forever until one of you leaves the system. Right? We'll learn with you forever. Or you have an opportunity that somebody will give you an amount of money every single day and deposit it into your account. You can only choose one of those systems. So I would imagine that any person that I ask this to would say, yeah, maybe I'll take the Torah. But they would only say that when they're being asked the question. But when they're not in front of the questioner, I think most people would say, the money is, I need the money. I mean, it's important money. The only person that would say they don't need the money is a person who has more than they feels that they have more. And I'm not sure that person exists, but feels that they have enough money or more than what they need. Why would we grapple with that? I'll concretize it. For some, Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Dr. Sachs, or Rabbi Frand, right, or some great, clear Torah teacher says to you, I'll learn with you every day. Because we don't understand the value of what that means. Not just of having a relationship with a rabbi like that, but of gaining Torah like that, gaining a clarity like that, gaining an inspiration like that. Because we don't value it the way it needs to be valued. So then that's why this is a weird Mishnah. Somebody teaches you one pasuk, you have to be noeg bo kavod, you have to feel a gratitude and act to that person like you would act to your Rebbe. Now, again, it doesn't mean halachically you have to stand up for your Rebbe. It doesn't mean that this person takes the role as your Rebbe, but the kind of kavod, the kind of appreciation you have for your Torah teacher because they've given you life in the world to come, so then that's what you have to have. The gratitude, the internal gratitude, noeg bo kavod, you have to treat them in a certain way. You can't stab a person like that in the back, because what that person has given you is they've given you life, and anyone who's given you life, you can't stab them. You can't treat them in that kind of way. Because you've given me everything. Because I appreciate that you've given me the foundation of my existence. But that could only happen if we appreciate that this is the foundation of our existence. And I think that that's what the Mishnah is trying to teach me. I think that the whole point of the Mishnah is to understand how precious the Torah is. And that's why it goes on to Achitophel. Achitophel was not a great person. Great Torah scholar, but not a great person. And look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, what did Achitophel teach David? So it says that he taught the David HaMelech Shnei Devarim, two things that could be construed as Torah lessons. He taught him two things that weren't two psukim, it wasn't two words of Torah, it wasn't two halachos. He taught him Shnei Devarim, he taught him two things from a lousy guy. Two things from a lousy guy turned the lousy guy into David HaMelech's Rabbi. Means that David HaMelech looked at him in a certain way, treated him in a certain way, would never treat him in a different way, even though he wasn't a great guy. But because David HaMelech appreciated that what I got from you gave me life. That what I got from you, maybe it's life only in one small sector of my life. Maybe it's only one small prat, one small piece of my life. But you gave me life. Because Torah is life. Torah is chayim. And if Achitophel's two dirty things, two sullied things, if that brought about that kind of reaction from David HaMelech, then imagine from a finer person. One thing. One straight up halacha. One pasuk. One clear teaching. Alachas kama v'kama, how much more so? Kal v'chomer. Person has to feel that kind of gratitude. Because that's what the Mishnah is teaching me. The Mishnah is teaching me the value that we have to give, the value we have to recognize in ourselves of what Torah is, and what learning Torah is, and what receiving Torah is. We often look at Torah as being, when we receive Torah from someone, so we receive nice, beautiful, it's pretty, it's inspirational, it's uplifting, it's great. But we very often don't recognize that what we've received, along with that Torah, is life. Is the ability to be able to get a better perspective on life, the ability to be able to add some meaning to life, the ability to be able to make life more fruitful, to make existence more fruitful, to make myself a better person. Those are fundamental things. Those are critical things without which I can't live. That's why we call the Torah Eitz Chaim Hi L'Machazikim Ba. For people that hold on to it, people that recognize its value, it's an Eitz Chaim. It gives incredible life. And when you give me one little piece of that, then I have to be very thankful. You know, I have a puzzle. And the puzzle is missing a lot of pieces. And they fell on the floor. There's a few under the couch. There's a few under a chair. They spread all over the floor. Every time you find one piece of the puzzle, oh, I found another piece! You're excited about it. Because you know, without that piece itself is inconsequential. That piece is just one little piece in a 5,000 piece puzzle. But every single piece of the puzzle carries with it the picture. And without every piece, you don't have a picture. And therefore, we have to recognize that the Torah that we receive, every single piece of it is precious. And when I've received it from you, I came to your house for Shabbos. and I saw how you made Kiddush, and I understood, oh, that's the way to make Kiddush. Or I watched the way that you did certain things on Shabbos, and I said, oh, that's the way to do it. The level of gratitude I have to have, the noeg bo kavod, is not because of your importance, but because of the value of what I've received. And this Mishnah, in the whole line of Mishnayos that talk about the value and the beauty of Torah, that's what this Mishnah is telling us also. That we have to make sure that we recognize the erech, the worth and the value, the appropriate worth and value, to every single piece and word of Torah that we receive, every experience that is a Torah experience, every single thing that goes into the makeup of making us who we are. We have to recognize its value, and when we recognize its value, then the appropriate level and degree of gratitude will be simple. Okay. That's this week's
Thanks,
Mishnah.
Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Rabbi.
My pleasure. It's good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
I was reading it.
You see me now?
I can see you now. Yeah. I was able to see your glasses. They're very, very nice glasses. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's nice to see you. Okay, it's good to see everyone. Have a great week.
Hi, Rabbi. Thank you.
Have
Thank
a
you
great
so
week.
much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Welcome back. Okay. I'm going to shut down and then turn back on.
Rabbi, is it going to be at 7:30 or 7 o'clock?
7:30. It was unfortunately printed mistakenly,
Yeah.
but it's 7:30.
You know,
Thank you.
Rabbi, you're talking to the Hassan Torah.
Yeah, Mazel Tov, by the way. Mazel Tov.
I was
Amazing.
going to brag about to you, but eventually,
Yeah, that's amazing.
who was teaching me the Hebrew? I'm learning now.
That's right.
Really,
Baruch Hashem.
Rabbi, you don't did it for me.
Baruch Hashem. Amazing.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
It's amazing.
You taught us a lot of.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
My pleasure. Mazel
It
Tov,
still
Mazel
does.
Tov.
Still does.
Yeah, still does. Still
Baruch
120, Rabbi. We wish you till 120 to teach
Oh,
us.
amen. We got a lot of learning to do. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm shutting down.
Because I don't get any younger, so I'll have enough time.
Okay.
Please.
I'm shutting down now, and then I'll turn on again for Daf Yomi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.